I think now would be a great time to bring in our next guest, Kitty Hundal. Kitty has a new book out that is, I believe, a fictionalized memoir. But from what I read in the Medium article that she has, it is based on real events that happened in her life to her family and herself. Kitty, you can explain this much better than me. So if you would please let us know what you have going on. It's good to see you here on the vigils. By the way, I think I've only interacted with you through Unity for J stuff.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. We can't see you at all. I don't know if that's intentional.
No, my webcam, normally I don't come on webcam anyway, but right now it's broken. So all you'll see is a white square, which is what you saw when I came in initially.
Mm-hmm.
I was experimenting with XSplit and it destroyed my webcam.
Ah.
Yeah, I think it's possible because I downloaded that one as well. Yeah, I did remove it, but it got worse. So I'm kind of stuck now, but basically, getting to the book, I've put 2 links into the chat. One is the article I wrote on pro-funk, which was basically blacklisting in Canada in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, up until 1983. The second link is my website, which if you click on the books menu, it will take you to my books website. And that has information about my book and about me. There's a biography there and things like that. Essentially, I come from a family of radicals, like we're, I guess, 3rd generation troublemakers, you know. My dad was a freedom fighter, and he was known as the Red Pimpernel by the British because of his ability to evade their detection of their spies. He was very good at hiding from them. My uncle founded one of the largest hard left organizations in Canada in the 1970s. And he was also behind the founding of similar organizations in the US, Ireland, England, and the Caribbean and India. So my father and my uncle were very well known to the intelligence agencies in the UK and Canada. They were very much targets in the sense that they were both very likely on the pro-funk lists. And the pro-funk lists included family. They included relatives, they included friends, co-workers, and they included people in the liberal left. They didn't limit themselves to the hard left, like the communists or the anarchists. They included people like Tommy Douglas, who was the father of Canada's public health care. They included the clerk of the Privy Council, Robert Rabinovich. I believe Trudeau was even on the list at one point, our prime minister, not the current prime minister, but his father, who was prime minister in the 70s and 60s in Canada. So they were pretty extensive. They had literally thousands and thousands of people on them. I filed a FOIA and was rejected. My request was rejected on privacy grounds, which I haven't bothered to appeal. It's ridiculous because all they have to do is redact the other names, right? But I haven't bothered to appeal because I've had so much experience with this kind of garbage. Essentially, what happens with people like me is that none of the rules apply to you. The law does not apply to you. And your life is put under a microscope. And you are set up for numerous things to be made to look a certain way. So your history gets rewritten. Your history as a person in society gets completely rewritten. So the person that they have invented and claim that I am is a completely different person than I actually am. So that's the strategy that has been implemented for years. Now, why they targeted me and not my siblings or not my other relatives, I don't know. I've studied the person who was doing it to try to get an understanding of who he was. And essentially, he's a psychopath. He's a pedophile. He's hardcore sexist, hardcore racist. So, you know, I guess I can assume that he targeted me because of all of those things. My sister was way too young, and there wouldn't have been anything for him to gain by targeting her. Same with my younger brother. My older brother would have been a real challenge for him because my older brother was very political. He was a very political person, very strategic. So he would have been a real challenge. So I have to assume that's why I got picked. I don't know, really. I'm just guessing. So basically the book goes into all of the different things that happened to me in the 1980s. And that was during the COINTELPRO era in the US. Well, it was at the end of the COINTELPRO era in the US and Canada's RCMP Dirty Tricks era. So during the RCMP Dirty Tricks era, I was a target. But then after that, the targeting continued. So I don't doubt that in the US, the COINTELPRO targeting also continued. Basically, I think we were all lied to when we thought that after having the Church Committee hearings and the MacDonald Commission hearings in Canada, that all of this was ending and the problem was fixed. No, it wasn't. What they did in Canada was that they made a lot of the stuff legal. So when the RCMP were illegally accessing people's mail without a warrant, that was made legal. So when CSIS was founded as the solution to the dirty tricks, CSIS was allowed to have CSIS had warrantless access to your mail. CSIS also had warrantless access to people's medical records. So for a long time, I wondered why they would have access to people's medical records unless they were up to doing bad things. And given my experience with the medical system in Canada, then I have to assume that that was why they were given the okay to interfere with people medically as well as in other ways. So to interfere with the mail. I have never had my mail come to my door directly, ever, in my entire life. It always takes double the time to get to my door as it does to get to my neighbor's door, for example. And I've actually tested that out. So the purpose of the book, especially for the current times, it's a warning. It's to show people this is the kind of stuff that they do. Now, in the 1980s, 90s, 2000, there were only a small handful of people that were targeted that way. After 9/11, the numbers expanded. After 2010, with Occupy movement and Stop TPP movements, the numbers really expanded. And then from 2015, as we saw in New Zealand, as Susie has told us many times, they've expanded out to child abuse victims, earthquake insurance victims, the general public, right? And now they've also expanded out in the sense that they're using private contractors more. It's become a profit-making business, which means that there's an incentive not only to expand the number of targets, but to target those people for a much longer time. There's a financial incentive to do that now. So the point of the book is to alert activists on the kind of things that they're going to see happen to them. It's a very dystopian world you're going to live in if you become a target. And all of the things that were done to me in the 80s, 90s, 2000s are happening to these activists like Liz, like Susie, like Julian Assange, like Jacob Appelbaum. They're all experiencing the same kinds of interferences in their lives, the same kind of intensity. Basically, there's two approaches. One is to well, actually, the main one is to put your life under a microscope. They put you under a microscope and they spin every single thing they can find in a negative way into a negative way. The other thing that they do is what you're seeing with Craig Murray, which is that they have taken a situation that he has, they've taken all of his writings as a journalist. They've taken that law and they've applied the law to his writings in a microscopic way. So they're looking for every tiny little bit detail that they can use against him. And it has nothing to do with whether he's actually violating the spirit of the contempt of court law or not. It has to do with what they can get him on, right? So there's a general approach. And I think it's really important for young activists today to understand what that general approach is. And it's actually important for everyone in society to start to understand what that general approach is, because they are not going to know if they've become a target. If you are an earthquake insurance applicant and all of a sudden your life starts going to hell, are you going to know that you're a target unless you have already been educated on what these agencies are doing to people? So that's the point of the book. The reason I say it's fictionalized, the character Rita is me. Rita's story is 99% true. There's a few things I fudged. The other stories in it, Greta's story, which I've included because she was a target of the same people in the 1950s, as early as the 1950s. Cameron from MK Ultra was involved in her targeting. I suspect she actually ended up in Cameron's psychiatric hospital. The other people are information that I've picked up from talking to people who know them. So the stories may or may not be true. They're witness testimony, but it's secondhand from my point of view, right?
If I could, let's kind of hold on or focus on the surveillance aspects of this, because I know that Mohammed, who has short time here, definitely can add to the aspects of that. And you did mention Liz Muller. Liz was gracious enough to join us on Thursday night. The specific targeting and surveillance that she was under and that Susie was under for their work in opposing a trade deal it is so over the top and out of hand and cartoonish that it's worth spending a few moments on. Mo, could you jump in for a moment, please?
Yeah, so many interesting things there. I always found that discussion very interesting. The description, including of the legalization of previous practices which were illegal. I was literally just thinking about how the Investigatory Powers Act here in the UK was passed after the revelations made by Edward Snowden. And one of the things that it did, it created a tribunal, a secret tribunal, which oversees the use of, if you wanna challenge certain surveillance practices by MI6 or MI5, or if warrants are to be obtained, or even surveillance practices engaged in without warrants. Now they use the Investigatory Powers Act. But what the act does is legalize mass surveillance activities engaged in by public authorities, especially security services, as they're known here, which were exposed by Edward Snowden. So that's exactly what we had over here, which is it was exposed. that they were engaged in these practices without legal basis, mass indiscriminate as well as discriminate surveillance practices without legal basis. And what happened was a law was passed to say, okay, much if not all of this is now legal. So that's what we experienced here as well. I find it interesting to hear that you had similar experiences in Canada.
Well,
So that's just on. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say
No, go ahead.
even worse, because Canada in 2015 passed a law that allows CSIS to engage in warrantless disrupt and destroy campaigns. So they can come at a person in the same way that Susie is being targeted, that Liz is being targeted, that I'm being targeted. They can do it without a warrant, as long as they stay within the confines of the law. Well, CSIS has warrantless access to your mail. They have warrantless access to your medical files. There's a whole lot of damage they can do within the law, right? Now, if they bring other people in, then they have to get a warrant. But the warrant is, the warrants go to judges that are very sympathetic in the first place. All CSIS
well, what kind of judge? Yeah, what kind of judge becomes a surveillance judge in the first place? It's like we have the same thing here with our surveillance courts, right? There's a judge who's overseeing an inquiry into surveillance. And actually, I'll discuss that, or I can mention that actually, because there is a public inquiry here into the use of surveillance and infiltration practices by these. This is after numerous sort of outrages were revealed in the press. But the judge that they've appointed, well, first it was a Court of Appeal judge, and he died, sadly. And, you know, he's a Court of Appeal judge, so he's a member of the establishment. But compared to the judge who died, the new judge, was literally a former judge in a secret court which permitted secret evidence brought against applicants, non-state actors who couldn't see the evidence brought against them. So it's like, oh, of all the judges you pick this one. Of course, he's going to already inherently accept the legitimacy of a very intrusive surveillance system. So sorry, I just wanted to mention that because that is exactly the critiques I've had here.
Yeah, that's actually very, very important. Basically, all they do in Canada is they just come up with fabricate a way of identifying you as a terrorist. So if they can come up with a way of applying that terrorist label to you, then anything goes in Canada. Literally anything goes.
And this is something that we just had happen here with our 2020 or 2019 National Defense Authorization Act, where hacktivists, leaktivists, and public disclosure outlets now all fall under that umbrella of terrorism. So WikiLeaks is an organization. Outlets that break news, or even independent content creators that are putting information out that is, I don't know, either obtained via leaks or reporting on that information that was obtained via leaks, can now be charged and indefinitely detained for proliferating that information.
Now to add another second component to that, I don't know if people have been following what's been happening with these women who were targeted by the Epstein network, but I've been following them for a little while. And what's really starting to sink in with me is that there's a very close connection here that we should not dismiss between what happened in those Epstein networks, the connection to the intelligence agencies, and the connections to influential people. These networks are being used to leverage influential people into doing things that are illegal and corrupt and amount to abuses of power. So it's actually, and that in the context of mass surveillance, it's a package. You have to look at it as a single package, because when you add mass surveillance to that, and when you add targeting to that, those are the same people that are engaging in those activities as well. I don't think it was an accident that Adelson it was Adelson's computers that UC Global used to transfer data to the CIA. We know that Adelson is part of this Epstein network. We know that Wexner is part of this Epstein network. So how do those connections fit in? This is something, there's still gaps. There's still lots of questions in that, but it's something that we have to really keep in mind, because I think my instincts are telling me that's really, really important. And it's something that hasn't been leaked. We haven't had a whistleblower come out other than these young women who were sexually exploited. But the stories that some of them are telling are very, very, they're not talking about the salacious details of, you know, these sextortion rings. What they're talking about is the politics behind what's going on. They're talking about what's happening to them because they have come out in the open and identified these people and identified what is going on with them. They're being targeted in the same way that I'm being targeted, Susie, Liz, and others. So there's the mass surveillance is an important thing, because the mass surveillance is telling us is that they're not creating special targets anymore. They want to be able to go after everybody this way, and the mass surveillance enables them to do that. That combined with, you know, things like the NDAA, or in Canada, the Anti-Terrorist Act. I don't know what it's called in the UK. Those acts combined with all these other little pieces of the picture are showing that we have already walked into dystopia. We're already there. This is not something that's coming in the future.
If I could actually bring that just a connection with what you mentioned earlier, Steve, about people who opposed TTIP and TPP being targeted for surveillance. I think if you look at the history of surveillance, including in the UK, I'll give that as an example, but I'm sure you'll find all kinds of examples in the United States as well. You find that there are the two main types of surveillance in terms of using the overall system to engage in a form of mass surveillance, right? So if you have one of the oldest public bodies here, longest standing bodies in the UK, is the post office. And you know, there was a unit which used to steam open letters, for example, from the colonies, like all of them, right? To see about people discussing dissent or plans to basically just to see what is going on in those letters. So that's a form of mass surveillance, because if you're targeting entire class of people, and that would be steaming open letters, reading them, and then closing them back up again and letting them make their way back to the intended recipient. And then, of course, when you had telecoms first being introduced, you also had mass surveillance via those telecoms, right? It wasn't till after the Church Committee hearings that you ended up having the FISA court being set up, and criminalization of corporate involvement as well in surveillance, warrantless surveillance, which was then retroactively immunized, I think, with the Bush or the Obama administration, after it was exposed that after 9/11, they all violated all the laws put in effect after church. So that's the mass surveillance aspect. That goes back as far as post. But you will always have targeted surveillance. So I wrote an article in 2017 called, was it Spying, Surveillance, and Sabotage? What will it take to bring an end to political policing? And in it, I try to show a historical examples, as well as different examples of surveillance, of targeted surveillance of organizations, infiltration, anti-war, environmental, social justice organizations, engage in what the system itself declares to be legal. So officially speaking, these organizations being targeted for infiltration, surveillance, and sabotage are engaged in activities that, officially speaking, they are legal. So, and they're not being targeted and sabotaged because they're worried that they're going to engage in terrorist activities. So as long as you've had the state, you will have surveillance, and you'll have targeting of groups which are seen to be challenging of a class-based system, right, of certain interests. So that will include corporate interests. So it's not surprising to me when you put that into context that people who challenge TPP, which was not, it's not just a trade deal, it's a deal that involves, hundreds of billions of pounds worth of potential corporate profits, you know, and globally speaking, or hundreds of billions of dollars. And it's a deal that was being pushed by the U.S. government, right? So it's by the U.S. government in conjunction with corporations. So it's you know, people who oppose power. The more you oppose power, the more likely you're going to be specifically targeted, and then that's where the mass surveillance powers come in handy for those, because they now have access to information that they otherwise wouldn't have. So it's twofold. There will always be individual targeted surveillance because you can just get more out of it. You know, if somebody you think they're your friend, or targeting neighbors, targeting organization members, or what have you, including just to sabotage organizations, right? If for no other reason. So it's you'll have both. So people can check out the article, some of the things I used to publish on that. I note that the Metropolitan Police admit that over the last 40 years, 400 groups. This is just the Metropolitan Police, right? This is not any of the other police departments. This is not MI5 or MI6 or branches of the military. Have targeted 400 groups, and now they've admitted it's actually 1,000 in the UK, or at least in England and Wales. So there's 1,000 organizations, almost invariably on the left. Sometimes they'll be on the right, but invariably on the left. Have been spied on since the 60s up to 2014 or 2015. And because of various revelations that came out time and time again in the press, recently over the last 7 years, a public inquiry was set up to investigate this. And the judge that they've appointed currently, the current judge, is a former spy court judge, a judge who's used to overseeing cases where they're like security courts, if you like, that were essentially created not that long ago. They have yet to hear evidence. This is like going on now the fifth year, you know, and they have yet to get into the meat of the subject matter. It's constant delays on the part of the police. Oh, we think that the police who are undercover shouldn't be named. Their names should be redacted. It's a constant battle, right? Because a great many women have discovered here that their partners, including in some cases fathering children with, turns out that these were undercover police officers. You know, and the police officers, the people would disappear, and like, what the fuck happened to my partner who came over for Thanksgiving or ate with the family over Christmas, and who I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with, and just disappeared. And it turns out that there is a member of Special Branch or Special Branch is now closed. So it's the replacement, or, you know, National Public Order Extremism Unit. I mean, these coming up with the more convoluted names, but I can't remember what the current name is of these units. And we keep being told it's closed down, they won't do it anymore, and then we open a new unit with a more convoluted name. And so it's completely outrageous. And these people aren't being accused. It's not like you're safeguarding the country from terrorism. I had to have sex with her, Your Honor, in order to find out what she knows about this ticking bomb, right? It's literally people that they admit these are like environmental activists and people who campaign against the arms trade and you know, people who oppose fox hunting, which itself is a crime in this country anyway, right? Fox hunting. But there you go. So it's built into the system. Surveillance is built into the system, and it's one of the core functions of the Metropolitan Police Force, police service, which is the very first modern police service. So surveillance was built into the very DNA of the first modern police force in order to prevent trouble to the establishment later on. 140 years ago, 150 years ago when it was first created. So the idea is that you would have a civil police force that was respected and professional, that could undermine things before they boiled up and exploded, right? So you get organizations, get possible dissent when it's still budding.
So
and
yeah. What I was going to say about that was that you've really nailed it there, because what they're doing is they're actually systematizing it even more, right? So it's becoming systematized to the point where they're working together in Canada the way it looks, and I could be wrong, but this is my assessment of what I've seen, is that DOD is involved, CSE, CSIS, right, and private contractors. And all the agencies work together and are working on bringing in the community for to participate. So recently we had DOD making a call out to members of the general public to participate in what they called a training program for their staff on surveillance. Well, they don't need the general public to come in and get trained on surveillance so that their staff can get trained on surveillance. You know what I mean? What they're actually doing is they're training the general public on surveillance. That's what they're doing. And so, but they can't say that because there might be outrage. So
no, you're absolutely right, though. There's an app or a website or whatever called Nextdoor. I don't know if it's over in the UK or up in Canada, but everybody has a Nextdoor neighborhood, and it's a snitch brigade, is what it is. The mayor of New York put out a hotline for where people can snitch on their neighbors who are violating coronavirus restrictions. Now, to their credit, New Yorkers responded wonderfully by sending Mayor de Blasio dick pics and pictures of their middle fingers, but to the point that where it like overloaded it. But you're absolutely right. The public is being trained to snitch. The public is being trained to spy, and they're being conditioned to feel good about it. A release of dopamine takes place when they rat out their neighbor, or they rat out their enemy, or they rat out a random stranger. It's the kind of cultural conditioning that, and I hate to use the term because it's getting thrown around everywhere, but it is Orwellian. It's what the people were taught to do in that book, and we're living it right now.
It was very East German. What we're told was the Stasi way of doing things, where people get put into a state of fear that they have to kind of report, that you wouldn't have conversations even in front of your kids because what they're being told in school, you don't want them to snitch on you. I didn't hear that about the mayor of New York. I should say that we've had police departments here where police chiefs of different police departments have suggested it, have specifically called for it, actually. Not all of them, but we've had them. It was on the news. Our mayor of London, thankfully, has not done that. I think quite wisely, because he'd probably get a similar reaction. Look, I get the fact that if you have an epidemic, it's a problem if people violate sort of certain rules that are meant to keep us healthy and sort of defeat the purpose of the lockdown. But at the same time, having, it's absolutely awful for social cohesion if you start turning people into snitches. What's it going to do for long-term societal relationships and neighborly relationships? And if I found out that my neighbor did that with me, I would be very, very upset. And I think that could go well beyond the lockdown. You know what I mean? Right?
It's cultural conditioning that's being done right now. It's very much cultural conditioning to get people to accept this. So you give them a legitimate reason to accept being a snitch. And then when it comes to after the legitimate reason is over, that culture continues, and the structures that are built to enable that culture continue. We saw that in legislation that was being passed, they called it anti-bullying legislation. But what it was really doing was giving warrantless access to everybody across Canada's internet access. So every ISP in Canada would have been obligated to give information about their users to the police. Now, okay, yes, we don't like bullying. That doesn't mean you give warrantless access to the police. For internet access, police still have to have grounds You know, they should still require a warrant. There's no reason to make that warrantless. But that's the approach, is to take a legitimate reason. Oh, we're fighting pedophiles. Well, do they need to do that to fight pedophiles? No. And will they succeed in fighting pedophiles that way? No. The way they'll succeed in fighting pedophiles is infiltrating pedophile websites and targeting those, right?
You know that's used, by the way, here in the UK as well. I mean, and it's so obvious to me when they do it, but I have to remember that it's not necessarily obvious to everybody for whom surveillance has been like a lifelong issue. Because when there's been our NSA, everybody knows the NSA, our version is the GCHQ, right? Government Communications Headquarters. So GCHQ, and they're the body which engages in mass surveillance here. And whenever there's criticism, or whenever there's a law, an expanded power being pushed here to probably further legalize what they're already doing in practice secretly, we're told, oh, this is going to be necessary to target pedophiles. It's like, really? So this massive system that's been set up during the Second World War, just after, to spy on foreign powers, to protect the country from, like, during the Second World War and then the emergent Cold War era, right, is actually really about targeting local pedophiles. That's fascinating. And is it actually necessary? Couldn't you just have a pedophile unit which has specific rules and powers specifically for them, if that's the case? Like, do you really need to be able to spy on 65 million residents of the UK? But that's all they do. They'll throw it out there because they know that it takes far much more time to critique the system that is already accepted as normal. It makes it sound like you're against targeting pedophiles.
Yeah.
And it's something they're doing right now with the Earn It Act in the US, the Earn IT. Essentially what it does is just destroy end-to-end encryption. It makes it so websites, if they host content that's ruled not good by the government, that website can be sued or just litigated out of existence. And there's actually a petition, if we could get that pulled up so everyone could take a look at it, to reach out to say no against this Earn It Act, because it's something that's going to basically destroy the fabric of the internet and destroy end-to-end encryption, because everything would have to pass through a content observer and basically record all of your information as it's being sent and before it gets sent. So if you could, we'll drop that in the chat too. But yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, because it's been, I don't know, a lot of awesome discussions that we've gotten able to fit into this hour here. If you could you and Kitty Mo both give some final thoughts and where people can find you?
If you're interested in my book, you can find it on kittyhundal.com. If you're interested in reading, I'm doing research into the spy agencies, history in Canada and the things that they've done. You can take a look at that Medium article. Really, people need to be alert to these issues, and that's what I'm trying to do. I want people to be aware of what's going on. I want activists to exercise a lot of caution, because we are already in a very dystopian era, and we're moving into a much darker one. And really, for your protection, you really need to be smart, you need to be aware, and you need to be careful.
Yeah, I would say, well, just made a bit of an update. So it was recently revealed there's a memo that's been discovered, I think first published by The Guardian, or first reported on by the Guardian newspaper, but I found the memo as well, which is, it's a ministerial memo by British government ministers calling for the addition of 5 more public bodies that will have access to our metadata under the Investigatory Powers Act, which we discussed at the beginning of this discussion, which we had said legalized much of the mass indiscriminate surveillance that was first revealed by Edward Snowden, or legalized it here in Britain. So they were engaged in it previously outside of the law, and then the Investigatory Powers Act legalized much of it and said, okay, they've got to apply for warrants, or they don't need warrants in many cases. So they're adding 5 public bodies, and it's just for people to be aware of, I suppose, Civil Nuclear Constabulary, who are responsible for guarding nuclear-related facilities, and the Environment Agency, the Insolvency Service, the UK National Authority for Counter Eavesdropping, a great name, and the Pensions Regulator. So yeah, just further public bodies that they're saying will have access to it. And the reason this is significant is, look, when they passed this law, it was like, this is necessary to defend us against terrorism. Terrorism. Yeah. Now, when you read the memorandum and it justifies why it's necessary for them, basic criminal justice arguments. So, okay, mass surveillance, metadata analysis, all these other things that we're told is the most extreme powers, but only for the most urgent and most necessary of cases. It's just the mass normalization of these emergency extreme powers. And so just to be aware, people should be aware that powers which come in on an emergency basis have a habit of becoming permanent even after so-called emergency time periods. It doesn't mean that the emergency isn't real. It just means that we should be very cautious about simply accepting power grabs because rights once lost are very difficult to be regained, and in certain respects took hundreds of years to gain them in the first place. You can find my work at MLMazi on Twitter. I publish with The Canary and Sputnik International mostly currently, but I've also published with The Grey Zone and with Open Democracy, and have my own website, which is theinterregnum.net, which is just my own blog for now. And yeah, those are the main places to be finding my work currently. And I'll tweet out my articles whenever I publish them.
Cool. Thank you guys very much again for joining us. And I would like to thank everybody in the audience for sticking with us and listening to the conversations. You can find us on Twitter at action_4 Assange. Thanks to one of our awesome supporters behind the scenes, Kimber, we now have a Facebook set up, which is facebook.com/action4 Assange. We do stream live on Rockfin now too. And I recommend everyone start looking at that as an alternative platform to receive information from YouTube. But yeah, my name's Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. And thank you guys again.
If you're just seeing me for the first time, my name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find that here on YouTube by typing in Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I am very recently also on Rockfin. Rockfin is vastly preferable, in my opinion, to YouTube, both in the way that they interact with creators and in the way that they interact with the audience. You can sign up for a free account and you can view all of the content that isn't premium on there for all the creators. If you endorse me for $9.99 a month, you then get access to the premium content of those creators and mine as well. It's basically like becoming a patron on Patreon, but instead of one creator, you get access to all of them. You can find me absolutely there on the Rockfin. On Twitter, I am at Slow News Day Show. I have a much neglected Facebook page of the same name. And just thank you very much for being here with us today. We love you guys. Thank you, Mohammed Almazi, to Kitty Hundal. We will try and get Alex from Red Star Radio on at some point. I'm unsure what happened to him today. I hope he's doing well. Sleepy Josh on the 1s and 2s, and Mean Panda on the graphics. That's going to do it for us. We will see you Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, with our guests Kevin Zeese and Danny Schurenson of Fortress on a Hill. That will be an incredible panel, so do not miss that. And until then, good luck to us all.